Okay, so tonight we're doing the third in a three-part series presentation about gardening and food storage. And when I look at the slide in front of us, I've done the 1 and 2 is done, and the focus of this one is obviously number 3. And so that even the listeners can hear this, we might hear this video clip later on. I'm actually not a good gardener, guys, and the stuff that you've seen me present, or you might go and find now, which is the Wicking Bed and the vertical gardening one. I'd really like everybody to see that as being, don't look at me as being a good gardener or anything, because I'm absolutely not. But I had an idea to start doing something one day for myself, and the result of starting to do things is the photos and things that I've shared and the learning that I've taken as I started to do things. So I'm actually one of the world's probably worst gardeners from many angles. But the big thing I wanted to change your thinking around is don't look at it and go, "Oh, I could never do that." Well, 10 years ago, I wasn't doing that. I just got started doing it, and the result of the photos and everything is the result of that little journey. So there's nothing special about me. I've got tons of learning to do about growing food. And I'm no superhero that I've got the environment I've got, other than I decided to start doing something. So the reason I'm sharing these with you isn't to show you how good I am. That's not the point, because I know in a lot of ways I'm just a babe. It's just, hey, I've had some experience. It's okay to share it. And you can do it too, right? You just got to apply your mind and start doing stuff. So don't look at my stuff and think it's, stuff of the Olympics and we can never get to that level. No, the only reason I'm there is because I started doing something. So my encouragement to you is, if you see my stuff and it inspires you to just get started, then that for me is the whole reason that I'm doing these presentations. So just please bear that in mind. So tonight's one is on food storage, right? And what I'm going to do is turn this little slide off that's in the video at the moment and just open up some photos and start showing you guys in many ways, what I think is the most important part of gardening is how the heck do you make your food resources last a long time? And we've spent a lot of time not only building up our gardening infrastructure, but building our knowledge of food storage. So, and there's only about 12 or 14 photos to share tonight, but there's a bit of talking around them. So let's just get started in that. So I'll just close the PowerPoint slide presentation, he says, and we should be looking at a photo. Once I get rid of all of these, we should be looking at a photo. Okay. So I thought I'd just throw this in here for you guys as well. And this has nothing to do with food preparation. It's just one topic I didn't touch on before. Seeds, I keep all mine in the fridge because they last longer. They go to sleep harder in the fridge or deeper. And everything that I grow is heirloom, which is spelled a funny way, but basically what it means is the stock of the seed is the natural plant that itself will go to seed when you grow it if you don't harvest it. So I've got 4,000 celery seeds because you let 2 celery plants go to seed using heirloom seeds, and you end up with nature just being so abundant, it's ridiculous. So if you're going to buy seeds from places like Bunnings and stuff, I'd encourage you probably not to, because they don't sell heirloom stuff. Heirloom is HEIRLOOM. Look for heirloom seeds, and then when you get them, store them in the fridge because it makes them go to sleep deeper. So you can store your seeds a lot longer and still expect to get a reasonable number germinating. So I thought I'd start right at the beginning of how do I do a garden? Well, you buy the right seeds and you throw them in the fridge. So they go to sleep hard and you'll get more germination over time. So that's kind of off topic for food preparation or food storage, right? But I just thought I'd share the start of it. And where do I get all these things from? Most of the times I get them from eBay, believe it or not. If you dial up heirloom seeds in eBay, you'll be flooded with Australian suppliers who are just too eager to sell you their seeds. So they're not hard to come by. There's a lot of people out on the web going, oh, you can't get hold of the original seed stock. I've never struck that problem at all here in Australia. So you grow all your food, you get all your veggies done, and there's only so many carrots you can eat when carrots are in harvest, or there's only so many apricots, as you can see in this photo here, that you can eat straight away. How do you start to then understand how to take what's coming out of your garden and store it? And the first thing, and this is the only photo I've got on this, is canning. Americans call it canning. We call it preserving. And people who are purist at this will see this photograph and cringe. And the reason they will is because these jars here are the jars that you're buying cosmetics or whatever in, and they've got a really tight lid that seals down again. Everybody in the preserving world will say you can never reuse these jars because the seal itself has already been compressed and won't seal during the preserving process. And we've looked at all our jars and said, you know what, we'll just give it a try, right? So a lot of these jars down here are single piece lids, and they're second hand from other things we brought from the shops. And the purists would say you shouldn't use them. They're right, because the seal has already been crushed once by the manufacturer in the goods that you brought. But we get just as many failures and therefore just as many successes using those jars as we do using the real jars. So you'll read a lot of stuff online if you go and start to look at preserving, and they also, like this golden lid one up there, that's particularly a weak lid, but it works fine. And we don't, like I said, the failure rate of those lids as compared to the real lids, all of these two-piece lids you're seeing here, is probably about the same. So in evidence of everyone that says you shouldn't use or you can't use, well, all of those cross-pattern lids in there, that's all single use. Those new jars, because I know the colour of our new lids, but they're still a single piece lid, right? Sorry, here you go.
Just wanted to throw something in. My mum used old jam jars to make new conserved jams, and she used to boil them up and water with soda. I don't know if it's like baking soda or whether it's that stuff that you put in the bathtub. I'm not sure, but in Dutch it was soda, and that was very old. They used before they invented dishwashing liquid, they used to wash dishes with that, and then rinse it with clean water. So she boiled it up in a big pot. She boiled all the jars and the lids, everything boiled up, so it was all completely sterile. And then she made a jam, and then she put it in the jars, and then she finished off with like paraffin or something like that. It's a white substance, and she'd boil it up, make it liquid, and then pour it on top of the jam, and then it would form like a sealed layer that there was no oxygen going into the jam, basically, that could make mold or whatever. So just a little tip for that.
And I wasn't actually going to talk too much about how to preserve, because if you go online, there's just so much resource that's going to teach you how to do this. The main things, I mean, for long-term food storage outside of a fridge, right, you need to be doing, and this is overall on everything that I'm covering tonight. Hey, Theodore, welcome. The main enemies against long-term food storage is temperature change and sunlight. So if you're keeping stuff constantly cool and out of sunlight, it's going to last the longest for you, and that applies to everything I'm going to show you tonight. So that photo is taken of a double cupboard that we converted into our house to be another food pantry. And obviously with the door closed, it's nice and cool and dark. So stuff's going to last a long time. Cleanliness for preserving, critical. We and every one of the preserving recipes out there is going to tell you, keep your jars spotless, heat them up before you start using them, to basically kill anything that's on them, and just keep yourself really clean and hygienic when you're doing this, because you don't want to have any bugs introduced into any of the food. And the reason I thought this was a good enough photo is because it sort of shows you the size of jars you can use. The biggest thing I can tell you from our experience, these are the two-piece jar lids that you get. So you've got a flat lid, and then the screw piece is separate. The critical thing we've found is, and it's quite strange when you got to get used to it, but you don't screw them down hard at all. You don't want a tight lid on these ones here, because when you're boiling the jars, it doesn't let the steam out, and the lid actually creases because the steam and the pressure's got to go somewhere. So if you start to do any preserving and you're using these 2-part lids, the biggest tip I can give you is don't screw these down too hard when you're going to go and put them into the pot for boiling, because it'll crease the lid, and obviously your chances of holding a seal with a creased lid is pretty poor. And it feels quite counterintuitive to leave the lid as loose as I do now, but we get a much better seal rate just leaving that screw part very, it's not tight at all. With the single piece lids, we screw those down with all the strength I can put in them, because I know I'm dealing with a lid that's already had the foam part crushed. So I boil those down, we'll screw them down really, really tight. And we've probably run the risk of blowing up a couple of jars, but we never have had that issue, so that they're strong enough to contain the pressure of boiling steam anyway. But with these double barrel lids, if you say, well, I'm going to go and give this a go, and you buy some jars for yourself or find some secondhand ones, just when you're midway of the process, just about to put this stuff into the boiling water for everything to be cooked, just don't screw your lids down too tight, and you'll probably end up with a better success rate of getting a seal. We use the big Valcolas. I've never heard of them in New Zealand where I was born. They didn't exist over there, but they're a big boiling pot. And we use those. We were given a couple actually, and the reason I like those is simply when you come to the preserving time, you can fit a lot of jars into one great big Valcola pot, so that's convenient. There's another aspect of preserving that you can preserve meat like chicken and beef and all that stuff in jars. We have not done that. We have not tried it, not even dipped our toe in there, because you need a proper pressure cooker to be able to gauge what's going inside the pressure cooker to be able to actually preserve your own meat. I would not use a fruit or chutney or beans and everything that's in these jars. You only have to boil that up in boiling water. You don't have to pressure cook anything. But for your meats, if you're going to go down that path with your preserving interests, then you need a decent pressure cooker, and one that can tell you, the exact pressure all the way through the cook process to be able to actually store meat in jars. And we don't own a pressure cooker that will do that. We should probably go and buy one and try it at some stage, but we generally got enough to do. So, I mean, before I move on to the other slides, this is about as far and as deep as I wanted to go, is to show you the photo, show that you can use those single lids, although all of the canning places will say you can't. As I said, the failure to get a seal is still probably the same for those as the double seal lids. And by the way, none of these actually need their screw lids on anymore, because the vacuum seal has already applied itself to the top of the glass of the jar. You can literally take those screw parts off these things now. We don't, just because we don't want to inadvertently knock the naked lid, so to speak, and break the seal, so we leave ours on. But you can actually take them all off. They're all vacuum sealed by the boiling process. So for tidiness sake or whatever, if you want to reuse the screw lids and you've got more preserving to do, you can actually unscrew those and the sealed lid will stay there quite happily. So I didn't have an intention to take you on the path of like, how do you preserve stuff? Like there's so much material on the internet, and that's where we learned from. I suppose the other thing I would share about this photo, and then I'll ask you guys whether you got questions about this. Most of the preserving recipes you'll get out there, in fact, all of them probably talk about the use of sugar. Like, in a big jar like this, you'd probably have to use a cup of sugar to preserve those apples. We don't use sugar now at all. There's enough sugar in the fruit alone that we've found that you don't need to add sugar to your preserving. And if we do, we add stevia. And my wife says if it calls for a cup of sugar, she can use about a quarter or half a cup of stevia, which is a natural sweetener. I've actually got stevia plants growing in my garden. That's how natural stevia is. So all of the recipes that you'll see out there for fruit and for chutneys and stuff call for sugar. We don't use it at all. If it's pure fruit like this, there's actually already enough sugar in those apricots that we don't even use anything in those. We just use clean water. But if there are recipes that are calling for sugar and we go, you'd see that this is a bit tart, then we don't use sugar, we use stevia, and it works absolutely perfectly fine. So that was about as far as I was going to go on preserving. Has anyone got any questions of what we learned, or anything you're seeing in the photo, or anything I haven't covered that you think is good?
I do. It's Pip here.
Yeah, Pip, go for your life.
We don't eat a lot of fruit. Like, we're on a very super low carb diet, so we eat a lot of cauliflower and greens, and sometimes sweet potato and things like that. Can we preserve those? Like,
Yes,
I
absolutely.
go to a canning workshop soon. I thought, I might as well learn from you too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
And we don't use sugar. We use xylitol in everything. So
yeah, I preferred the natural one. So stevia for that is us. The reason I'm zooming in on the photograph to show you and everyone listening to this later on, that jar there is full of green beans.
Oh, great.
And those are just done in vinegar with some pepper and some onion. And, we've in this pantry, there's 21 jars of fresh preserved beans.
Great. How long do they last?
Well, depends what you're prepared to put up with, I suppose. Generally, home preserving like this, I'd trust it for maybe 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
But a lot of the stuff we either give away or we start to try and eat ourselves and get our way through it, because next summer comes around pretty fast.
Yes.
And then you're back into, you've got a surplus and you're trying to preserve it again.
Yeah.
But so, we do use this. There's chutneys in here, there's beans in there, there's a fair bit of vegetable in some of these jars as well. Basically, everything you grow in your garden, you can preserve one way or the other. There's nothing. Well, I mean, lettuces, you couldn't preserve those, right? But anything that's got some density to the plant or to the root, you can preserve it or store it.
Thank you.
You're just going to have problems with, like, lettuces and big leafy greens. We store, it's not in this photo, I don't think there's one in here. No, there's 2 big jars of sauerkraut, and that's really easy to make. So we'll store cabbages using sauerkraut methods, which doesn't use boiling water and preserving to produce what you guys are seeing here.
Yeah. Yes, I've made them before. I sterilise my jars in the oven when I do that.
Yeah. And that's why I didn't really have an intention of spending a huge amount of time trying to tell everybody how to actually preserve, because the resources on the internet are huge.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Gary.
That's right. No sweat. Feel free. That's what we're here to do, right? Share information together. It's cool. Is there any other questions, comments, or anything on this level of storing food?
Yeah, I've got a question. Hello.
Yeah, go.
What was the stevia ratio?
If it calls for a cup of sugar, Debbie uses about 1/3 of a cup of stevia.
Okay.
So you do
cool.
like at least half the amount of white stevia powder. So we can get stevia from Woolies and shops in Australia. They comes in like great big cans, like the energy drink size cans. But it's a pop lid like coffee. And if it calls for a cup, use 1/3 of a cup.
Okay.
It goes a lot further than sugar, and obviously it's a natural one, so hopefully it's the best type of sweetener you can get.
So a third of a cup of stevia to 1 cup of sugar. That's the ratio. Okay, cool. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
That's right. If I go out and eat a stevia leaf out of my backyard, it is literally like putting a teaspoon of sugar in your mouth. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's got a bit of a green taste to it, but the amount of sugar that comes off the leaf is unbelievable. Yes,
Gary, I've grown it too. I know exactly what you're talking about. But it does have a funny kind of weird taste, but that's some getting used to, but it's very nice. And the other thing is stevia is you probably know this, but it's a natural blood sugar balancer. So it actually does not do a blood sugar spike. So it's very good if you're a bit hypoglycemic from sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually got a couple of medicinal benefits as well, like herbal medicine benefits too. I forget what they are. but it's that sweetener, and with everything else, it's good, right? So why would you use sugar?
Exactly.
Yeah. So out of these sort of storages, lifetime, I wouldn't even look at it being doubtful until probably 2 to 3 years. But I eat a lot of food that I've stored for a long time, so I'm a bit radical in that regard. But they are homegrown, right? Or home produced, so they're not going to last as long as something that's commercially produced. But I mean, that stuff in cans that they preserve's probably got no food benefit in it at all anymore because it's had to be so processed to give it the shelf life. It's all right. So let's finish with this before we get too bored, and we'll carry on. Oh, where have I gone here? Uh-oh. I'm in trouble. Give me a minute, please. Should be here. Food storage, right? And what I'm talking about is no fridge storage. We've got 2 of these. They're dehydrators. They have, please go right, temperature gauges on top of them, which tell you what to do. And you can't get this wrong because, well, I suppose you could overheat things, but if you put them on at the right temperature and things don't dry out in a reasonable time, just leave them and they will eventually dry out. So if you actually manage to get the temperature to not hot enough or warm enough, it's just going to take slightly longer to dry whatever you're trying to dry. So that's the top of one of mine. The other one looks like that so that people can write down the brand if you wanted it to. I just brought both of them over eBay. And there's nothing really that can't go in these things. So I just wanted to share what they look like. And I'm not saying these models are good or anything else at all. I'm just showing you what we use. There's round ones out there. There's 10 shelf ones. There's 8 shelf ones. There's all sorts of array of these. I already owned one rack of them anyway, and I thought, well, with the amount of food we can produce here, 2 of them is better than one. We do a lot of for storing fresh fruit and things. We use these a lot too. These are silicon mats again, just brought off eBay. Probably came from China, maybe Japan. And we use this, and we just throw that. It's just a rubber mat, what you're looking at, but obviously the holes are a lot finer. For storing summer fruit like strawberries, blackberries, bananas, what am I thinking of? I can see the fruit as well. Pawpaws, papayas, all that sort of stuff. Mangoes, that's what I was looking for. We turn all of that fresh summer fruit into roll-ups, kiddies roll-ups, right? And the recipes on those are super easy. You just throw the fruit into a blender with some honey and some lemon juice, and that's your roll-up base. You end up with something like a really wet liquid sort of strawberry jam or banana jam type consistency. And then we pour them out in these trays and we make flat pancakes and let that dry because those holes are small enough that it doesn't let that sort of honey viscosity flow through it. And we just make roll-ups and throw those into the pantry because the honey is a preserver on whatever fruit you're trying to store. And it's actually quite convenient to go and grab a roll-up and eat a roll-up in the middle of winter. You're eating fresh strawberries you've grown yourself right through the winter months. It hasn't been cooked. It's just been preserved in honey, so it's still hopefully got all the goodness as a fresh piece of strawberry would have in midsummer. And we have fun actually eating roll-ups. But I just thought I'd show you the sort of the different shelves there, right? So that's the main gap when you're doing other big foods. That one's actually got potatoes slices on the top of it. I've got a couple of photos of how to do those in a minute. So that's the naked shelf, so to speak, and you can go out and buy those rubber mats, and that means you can make roll-ups, and that means all summer fruit can be made into roll-ups and stored not using any power. So they go in our pantry when I find them after Debbie's hidden them, and I munch through my fresh fruit in winter. No power required to store your food.
Gary, can I ask, do you vacuum seal them or not?
No, the roll-ups, no, there's no need at all. No, I've got a lot. Some of the photos that you'll see very quickly are about vacuum sealing, but no, I don't vacuum seal those at all. The tube have been nice in winter anyway. They never last right through winter, so we just don't bother. The honey's the preservative in that example, so the honey does a fantastic job of that. So summer fruit, ladies, and you want to have good fresh summer fruit in winter without using a refrigerator, go make roll-ups. Easy, and they're delightful. Yeah, there's the mat just from another angle. That's what it looks like, and we just pour it out there, use a spatula to try and get it reasonable thickness, and then they go in here and you make roll-ups. That's potato, just to give you an idea. This is what I mean about doing stuff, right? I got some potatoes out of the garden, cut them up, threw them into the dryer just to see what would happen. Didn't do any referencing, looking it up at all. Opened up the shelf, and the black potato had gone jet black, like darker than something you'd walk on. So I thought, I better go and actually look it up online. So to store potatoes long time without any refrigeration, you cook up the potato like you're going to serve it up as a family meal. You let them cool down. You cut them into 3/8 inch slices, which is roughly what you're looking at there. And you dry that once it's been cooked. The chips, you'll see in a second, go golden brown, like that. And they go translucent. And you're about to see these vacuum sealed, by the way. But there's fresh cooked potato that's now been dried, obviously. I reckon, and I've never tried because, I just haven't been doing this for long enough. I reckon they'd be good enough for probably 10 years like that. Once they're vacuum sealed, there's a whole big bowl of them. Oh, that was the other photo I was going to get for this presentation. I forgot to take it. That's the vacuum sealer behind that stack of potatoes. So there is, that's a lot of potato right there, because obviously without the liquid in it, you get way more potato than you would if they were in their natural form. And then we vacuum seal those down. And as I said, I wouldn't have a problem having those 5 or 10 years after the time we sealed them. So, anything that you want to dry from your garden goes into these things, and then either sits like, so we dry and we use this for cloves. We dry and use this for a lot of our herbs. And then obviously we don't vacuum seal the herbs; they just go into glass jars. But making your own greens, you can buy those green smoothie things that charge up your lemon milkshakes and those sort of things. We make those at home now anyway, just drying off the leaf and then putting them through process to the point of turning those leaves into really dry powder, and you end up with your own super greens that can live in a jar. So there's no end to what you can store. You just start looking it up online and go for it, basically. So that gives you an idea of that. This is vacuum sealing. There's a little bit to show you here, which doesn't necessarily meet the eye. It took me 4 years to figure out. Okay, so let me explain what's going on here. This is the result of that machine that's behind the potatoes, because that's what's about to happen to potatoes. That's a vacuum sealer for people who've never seen one before. They've got a big roll of plastic in them, 30 meters long, and you heat seal and make your own length of plastic bag. And those plastic bags, once you've made them, look like that. So just to give you an idea of what you're actually looking at. So there's a few things going on here. The first thing is this plastic leaks oxygen. No one tells you that, right? So over a 5-year period, the plastic actually breathes. So you'll find, without even puncturing the bags, that if you seal your food down and leave it for 5 years, the bags will actually have leached some oxygen through the plastic. They don't tell you that stuff, right? So I'll show you the remedy that I use to get around that. But just be aware, if you're using vacuum sealing, it's good for 3, 4, maybe 5 years. But after that, the actual seal, whilst the seal hasn't broken down, the plastic has lent some air get through the plastic itself, because the vacuum's there, the air's trying to get inside it. Plastic is a little bit porous, and your air goes in. So you just got to keep an eye on
you guys. You okay?
Yeah.
Oh,
So, Okay, so then what we've done in this example, right? This is fresh dried
Lunch.
pear, obviously. Yeah, this is fresh dried pear. This one was sealed in 7.21. We bought those at $2.50 a kilo, and we got them from Woolies. Who knew? So I actually use these to kind of track the increases in prices of food, just from an interest perspective. But obviously, you need to know what's in your vacuum seal bags and when you did that. So the other thing you're looking at here, and it took me ages to come up with the idea that's now so simple it's ridiculous. You know how you get stuff delivered in cardboard boxes and stuff? I ended up working out. So what happens when you're sealing, let's say, bananas, right? When you dry bananas, they get really sharp edges, and those sharp edges, when you try and vacuum seal the bags, just puncture the bag, which destroys the bag, breaks the vacuum seal, and you just give up in frustration. The big epiphany from me: get some thickest possible cardboard and put your food that's now dry in a brown paper sandwich bag in those. You buy that stuff from Woolies and they cost you like 4 cents a bag or a cent a bag. They're really cheap. Brown paper sandwich bags. And put those between 2 layers of cardboard, which in the instance of banana then means the sandwich brown bag that's in between the cardboard will definitely be held by the banana. But when the banana hits the cardboard, it provides like 1/4 of an inch buffer. So if you're doing food that's sharp, and what I mean by that is apples, pears, bananas, anything that's going to dry with a sharp edge, here's your way of protecting the integrity of the bag. You just use cardboard. Because I was getting a lot of holes in mine, which mean, you put away a container of the stuff, you come back in 6 months' time, and 5 of them have got full-blown air with no vacuum left. So the way of solving that I came up with was using cardboard both sides, and it worked perfectly. So we do this a lot. And again, it's just to show you. And I write on top of the bags, because when I stack them all into the containers, you can just come along like a library index card and see what you've got in that particular container. But there you go. That's plastic sealing of food for long-term food storage. Let me just get to this. So the next level, so this is plastic bags, obviously, and you make them yourself off the rolls using the vacuum sealer. And if you're smart, you go start storing some cardboard and start using cardboard to protect them. The next level of bag storage you can go to are these type of bags. Now, this is Mylar. It's like thick tin foil. But your vacuum sealers can't use these. So you can't use a vacuum sealer to actually seal these down. And there's a couple of reasons for that. These don't have perforations that let the air out. But my vacuum sealer, at least anyway, someone's might prove me wrong, doesn't generate enough heat to seal these bags. So I figured out another way, which obviously I'll tell you about. But the thing with these bags, once they're sealed, there is no leaking of air into the bag at any stage. And obviously the food, regardless of me keeping those other plastic bags in dark containers, there is no sunlight ever going to get to what's inside these Mylar bags. So if you're really going for really deep, long-term food storage, these Mylar bags are the way to go. But they're a little bit more hassle because you can't buy a machine in a domestic environment. They sell them for commercial reasons that will actually sell these bags. They're cheap to buy still. You eBay them and you're still buying a pack of 50 for not very much money. And if you're looking for really deep, long-term storage, then I go this way when I'm doing that. And what they look like is this, right? And I need to explain what you're seeing here. Obviously, that one's had oats stored in it, and we put those in on January 2021, and we paid $1.35. So as I said, I use them to track the cost. There's a couple of things to notice in this photo. This bag looks all loose, right? It doesn't look like it's been vacuum sealed at all. And there's a really good reason for that. What I do is I use the oxygen absorbers that, if you buy something like from, I don't know, not perfume, but if you buy cosmetics and stuff, they often come with the vacuum, with the oxygen absorbers. So to get this sealed the way I've done, this is literally what I do. I've got the oxygen absorbers, and I know roughly how much has to go into what size bags now, just from experience. So in they go, and then I grab actually our iron, and I seal this whole lever here, this whole edge here with the hot iron, but I've got a drinking straw at one end of it. So I actually get on the drinking straw. I use my own just lung vacuum pressure to pull the air out. I quickly seal that with the iron once you pull the straw out, once you've got some sort of vacuum level. But you still end up with this, right, which feels like a wet, floppy bag that hasn't sealed at all. The big difference here is the oxygen absorbers pull the oxygen out of our atmosphere that's being stored in the bag. The bags don't go vacuum tight because the oxygen absorbers take the oxygen out, but they leave the nitrogen in place. So they don't vacuum seal, but you're dealing with a sealed bag, but they don't create a vacuum. What they do is they pull the oxygen out. So if you get used to hanging on to these plastic ones, they feel like a cardboard book, right? They're as stiff and as vacuum pulled down as all get out. Whereas with Mylar, they come out still soft, and it's almost like there is no vacuum at all. There is, but what's in there is just nitrogen, because the oxygen has been taken out by the oxygen absorbing pills that are in there, those little packets. So it's quite a weird feeling to use these, because they don't go hard and vacuumed hard down like the machine does. They stay quite soft and sort of like unsealed in feeling. But because the oxygen's been taken out. Yeah, sure.
With all the nitrogen that's in there, how does that affect any natural products that you store?
It doesn't, you see, because nitrogen's a preserver in its own right. And it's the oxygen that actually destroys your food, or gives the food a chance of decay. Nitrogen doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question, mate, because I've gone through that learning curve with this stuff, because I'm going, oh, crikey, that bag still feels loose and floppy. It can't possibly work. But when you sit down and read it, I actually put slightly too many oxygen absorbers in there to guarantee that there's only nitrogen left in the bag once it's sealed. So they don't feel like they worked, but they have. That's probably the easiest way I can say it. So those are the two options that I've discovered anyway. You know, plastic bags like these with cardboard to protect it, because like fresh pear, right? That's a classic. That would puncture that bag within 2 or 3 weeks, because the vacuum's going to make the plastic go weak, and the skin of the pear, once it's dried down, goes really hard. You know, it's like the bindies on the ground here in Australia. It goes to that hard. So the cardboard protects it from that. And then if you want to go further, you can use Mylar. And these are available as, I don't know, probably about 8 different bag sizes. So you can get them all different sizes. And, you know, I use an iron on that edge, just a normal clothes iron with a plastic drinking straw. So I can pull that out once the oxygen absorber's in there, grab it over, pull the straw out, and seal the bag with the iron. Job done. So that's long-term food storage over, I think, from the bag's perspective. Next one, buckets of sand. What you're looking at is keeping. Remember how I said when I started the presentation, right? That you know the two enemies is sunlight and temperature change. Sand stops both, because if you drop a thermometer into these sand buckets that we use, once you get about 25 mil away from the edge of the bucket, the sand temperature doesn't change, because it's every fine little granule of sand is obviously insulation for stopping heat getting into the middle of the bucket. So we can get lemons to last in these for about 9 months. No working parts, no power cost, no nothing. But what you're looking at is quite finely sieved sand, because you don't want, in fresh fruit, for instance, you don't want pebbles that are big enough to puncture the skin, because obviously there's a bit of weight in these buckets. By the time you put a row of, there's probably about 4 rows of lemons in these at the moment, four lemons deep. So if you've got too big of stones with that weight on top, that'll puncture the skin. You'll end up with some rotten lemons. So I just bought the sand from Bunnings or some, one of the local sort of ag suppliers, brought it home, put it through a few sievings to get it quite fine. And that's what I've learned about this stuff here. We originally just used it straight out of the bag, and we ended up with maybe 50% of the lemons had gone rotten. So I've learned very quickly to fine sieve the sand, make it like kind of almost as close as you can get to talcum powder. And then the failure rate of the lemons, we might get 1 or maybe 2 that go moldy within 9 months, and the rest of them are still fine. So in this form of food storage, garlic, anything citrus, can go in these things, and they're dry. They don't need any water on the sand at all. So these 3 pots at the moment are full of garlic. So this photo was taken a little while ago, and we've put our garlic crop away. That garlic will be good right through the entire time. There's no rotting on garlic at all because it seals itself down hard. Then you put it in the sand, you're sort of double insulating it from itself. If you wanted to use the same sand for storage of parsnips, turnips, and carrots, you can, but you put a bit of moisture in the sand, so it wants moist sand, and you just lay them down horizontally once you've harvested them, and just put them down layer by layer by layer. And in that damp sand environment, carrots and stuff will last for months, and you'll pull them out, and it'll be literally like you pulled them out of the ground only a day ago. And one thing I'm going to share with you guys, I found a book called The Lost Ways, which was from the North American pioneers as they were breaking open America. And it's got magical tips and tricks in it, and it's literally from the era of horse and cart. So it's a really good source, and I'm happy to share that with anyone that's put up with my voice for this long. So just send me a message, and I'll flick it back to you when we're done with this presentation. So what you're looking at, guys, is like this is definitely for us. I wouldn't call it a fridge, but it's definitely probably one of our most universal long-term food storage strategies, and we use it for a whole bunch of stuff. No moving parts, nothing can break down. You won't come home and find you've lost a whole bucket of lemons, because something went wrong. Once you've got food in this sort of really dry environment, it's a really good way of storing food. One of the tips for this, though, well, 2 tips. It's got to be finely sieved. You've got to get all the little rocks out of it, so you've got just really fine sand granules. The other is, having learnt this, if you do get some rotten fruit in things sort of turn pear-shaped and you're a bit worried about contaminating the sand, my wife hates this, but the best way I've figured out of actually getting rid of that bacteria is in the oven. So when she goes out, sometimes I actually bake sand in our oven to get rid of any impurities in the sand. And then I'll bring it back out, sieve it again just to get any chunks out of it, and start to use it again. So the only bit of maintenance I do on the sand is if one of these buckets, for instance, had 4 or 5 lemons that went moldy, I'd bake that sand and clean it again. But you're not damaging it, right? So you don't lose anything. You just got to do a little bit of maintenance on whichever one it was, and your sand reserves are returned to production use. So it doesn't even matter if the sand gets contaminated. You clean it and reuse it. Good to go. So we've done, what have we done? We've done vacuum sealing. We've done preserving, wet and dry preserving in jars. And we've done plastic bags. We've done mylar. And now we've just talked about sand. Who knew? They don't tell you. They probably don't want you to know. And lemons for 9 months. If you pick lemons off your tree now and put it in the fridge, you won't get very long out of it at all, right? Well, we'll happily get 9 months out of our fresh lemons in the sand, which means probably, I haven't tried them because I haven't grown them yet, but probably means oranges will do the same, and I would suspect grapefruits and limes would be the same as well. I'll let you know because those trees are growing and maturing on my property at the moment. Any questions about sand? Crazy topic, I know, but it works.
Yeah,
No?
Gary,
Okay.
so these buckets of sand, you don't necessarily need to put them in shade or anything, or
No, mate. Mine. I've got a big conservatory area, so these are undercover. You can see how much light's
yeah.
there. No, I haven't noticed a difference at all. What I can tell you is I did put thermometers through one of these things. You come out and test them. Like I said, once you get about 25, like an inch into these things from the outside of it, the sand temperature, even in the hot summer days, stays very, very constant.
So from the picture, it looks like you've got the plastic lining, so it doesn't matter what kind of bucket you use. I've seen a video where they use, I think, terracotta pots, and that cools things down as well for cool
Even more, yeah.
storage.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay. So
absolutely.
could you combine the two, like use a
Yeah,
terracotta pots
absolutely.
and use sand?
Yes, absolutely. The only reason I'm using these is because these are big normal growing pots, and you see the sacks is just to stop the sand flowing out the bottom where the water drainage holes are. That was the most convenient container I had available. So terracotta pots will probably give you a way better result from as far as length of time of storage than these plastic pots. But no, I haven't even needed to put these out of the sunlight because the sand is such a good insulator. They just don't tell you, right? You got to go and find the stuff. Next on the list, and this is the last thing, right? This is the presentation done. Here's some eggs. Whoa, what's good about that? I can fresh store eggs for about 18 months in this stuff. And here's the chemical you use, which is a lime product. And you just mix some of that in with pure water and throw your eggs into it. Now, the thing with the eggs, though, is they can never have been washed, which might sound a little bit terrible, but just hold the thought for a second. The reason is that the eggshell is super absorbent of moisture. So if you wash an eggshell and then try and store it in there, the washing of the eggshell itself, of a fresh egg, opens the pore up in the atomic level of the eggshell. And so you're actually kind of breaking the seal of the yolk and the white of the egg because you're opening up the eggshell itself. So the best you ever do to store eggs like this is you just dry paper towel and get all the dirt off using a dry paper towel. And the same thing applies like when you pull the egg out, if it's still got a bit of debris on it, like that one there's looks like it might have a bit of blood or dirt or something like that. You just wash the eggshell under the tap before you crack it open and you're good to go. So I know it might sound terrible that you're sort of storing sort of maybe what people would call a contaminated egg in here, but you cannot do this with a washed egg. So you don't have a lot of choice really. Like you can't use an oil, you can't use any liquid on it, otherwise the egg will go rotten in this solution. I ate fresh eggs out of here about 4 months old, and it's probably about time I make another omelette with the next lot, which will now probably be about 6 or 7 months old. And there is really no tangible difference when I had them when they were 4 months old. Apparently they do deteriorate over time, but that deterioration from the actual like how thick the egg is or how good it makes scrambled eggs, that sort of deterioration doesn't happen until well after a year. So fresh eggs, just stored in a water solution, tucked away from light. So these just live in a cupboard in our house. And, if there's ever a food shortage and you want fresh eggs and you've got 3 or 4 big containers, because these are obviously small containers, but if you've got 2 or 3 big containers of eggs, you've got fresh eggs for a year without power. So if you use search engines, there will be a way of storing the food that you're producing, either vacuum seal, drying, Morse and pestle, putting them through processors, turn them into a fine powder. Kidney beans that you can store in those preserving jars in a dry environment. They're good for about 15 years. It's called dry preserving, using no liquid, but using the vacuum seal of the jar. Sand, who knew? And here's eggs. This is called water glassing as a technique if you want to write down water glassing and just read about that. But it's super simple. You just buy that product, calcium hydroxide, mix it as they prescribe with some water, and storing eggs for well over a year, fresh, not pickled, not processed, fresh. So yeah, that kind of ends my whole story on food preservation, right? Because that's what we do here and what we've learned. So plastic bags with cardboard, took me about a year to think about how to get the cardboard in there. We learned about potatoes, but you can use these vacuum sealers for virtually any sort of food you want. So you could come along and get a mango, dry it, and then put it in the vacuum bags. We've done that too. They come out beautiful. It's just delicious to eat that fresh fruit in the middle of winter, unprocessed. Just a little bit dried to take some of the moisture out, and vacuum seal them. Works fine. So yeah, guys, that's obviously there's a fair bit in there, but that's what we do with our food, because gardening's one side, right? If you're gardening to excess, as far as you've got a surplus because you're trying to build up a food reserve and be a bit more independent, so you can get to this level here, then you've got to go down the track of doing what we've done. Otherwise, your surplus from your garden is going to go off. You're going to end up with waste for your surplus because you just can't store it. So for me, the whole gardening experience starts with where I started tonight at that slide with the seeds in the fridge, to then our teaching of what we taught ourselves to do is then start to focus on how the heck do we store food for long time periods? And these are our answers, so feel free to ask. No.
Hey, Gary. I've got 3 apple trees, and I've got chooks under 2 of them.
Yep.
So there was a couple of things. One of the things was just a side thing with the eggs. We had a broody chicken, which is under the apple trees. We had a broody chicken. So we I was trying to find eggs that she could sit on, and I did find some. And I didn't realize, but like if you ever remove eggs from a fertilized eggs, you never ever try not to touch them, which is obviously difficult, but you just minimally touch them and put them straight under the chook because of that coating you were talking about.
Yep.
With the egg sort of, what's it called, Gary? I can't remember the terminology, but yeah, super important, that porous thing with the eggshell. I didn't realize any of that. So, and there's other aspects to that whole eggshell porous thing, which is someone said if you wash them, they don't actually last as long in a fridge. Someone told me that recently. Yep. Yeah. So never wash your eggs. And there was another question I had, but I've actually forgotten it. So maybe someone else has one.
Gary, I have a question about the sand.
Yep.
The produce that you store in there, do you have any problems with animals or pests trying to dig into any of that?
Never.
Right.
That's why we make shotguns, right? Drop the mouse. No, seriously, no. They must give off some sort of smell, but we've never had mice or rats or anything come around our place. Hardly ever. Touch wood.
No possums.
No, I don't. I'm living in an urban suburb, so no, we're too far away from the bush line for possums to get to it. But I mean, you had a problem like that. I mean, go use the terracotta pots and put a blooming, a walking paver on top of it. Nothing's going to get into that.
Thanks, Gary.
That's right. You just protect the sand, right? So, yeah. Oh well, if that's done, I'm happy. Like I just wanted to sort of show you. For me, the gardening side is one thing, but there's a whole education, obviously, if you're interested in trying to make your garden last sort of across seasons.
Hey, Gary, I remembered Gary,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. I remembered my question before I forget. With the apples, because I haven't really cared for the trees because I haven't lived here. Like I left for 5 years, this house, and then came back. So the people that rented this house trashed I had the most incredible oasis here and they just trashed it. But anyway, I've slowly restored it over the last 2 years. It's a slow process. And my apples have got that worm that crawls up the stem, but I put the chooks under to try to stop that. So we got quite a good apple crop this year. So we were overloaded. So I was like, well, I'll just have to preserve them. But I don't have any of the fancy gear. So I just went to the op shop, got screw lids, the metal screw lids, like the glass, like old coffee jars and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then I just did I just hope they last a long time. So my question is about their longevity. So I just did the boiling water thing with them. So had it all set up on the sink, poured all the boiling water in to sterilize the jars so it's boiling hot, brought the fruit to the boil. I did use sugar, but if I'd known about stevia, I didn't know you could use stevia. And then I just quickly did it while everything was hot, screwed the lids on while it was all hot, boiling hot, with gloves and stuff, and then just let it all cool, and now it's all in the cupboard. So I'm just wondering, how long do you reckon that's going to last?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. So in the preserving that we use, using hot water and hot syrup and hot jars, and you're dropping them into Valcola, which is just a big fancy big pot. And then you'll boil them for like 15, 20 minutes. So you're cooking the fruit in the jar. You've used slightly different. So I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know how long that would last. I would think it's probably less. You get less time out of it than we would out of ours because we're boiling the fruit in the jar and actually cooking it where it is. You did it a slightly different way. So I don't know. Maybe 6 months, a year, maybe. I don't know.
And so I see what you mean. So do you think if you put those jars in a big, massive stock pot, right, and boiled it all up that way, would that work just as well? No.
Yeah, but the reason I didn't cover any of that is simply because if you look online in the resources, there's a billion people trying to teach you that stuff.
Sure.
While you've been talking, I'll just share this with you. For apples, we use this. We brought one of these. I just looked it up on eBay. Perfect, right? If you want to lose the skin, you can. If you don't, you just take that cutting edge off there, and so you can still dry with the skin. Gives you a uniform cut. They're not expensive. What is that? $17 delivered to my door. And then here's what we do with them. We cut them up, put them on the trays, but before you start drying them, and this is a trade secret, we drizzle them with a little bit of honey and then sprinkle them with cinnamon. And then we dry them, and man, they're delicious, and they're good for like in a vacuum bag. They're good for 5 or 6 years.
Wow, that's fantastic.
You're pulling out fresh apple that's been infused with cinnamon and honey. They're awesome. But we actually wore one of these machines out. We had to buy another one this year because our one from last year was actually worn out.
Wow, that's cool. I'll try that next year.
Yeah, this is a really good slicer because you end up with a uniform thickness of your slices. So everything on your drying trays is going to take roughly the same amount of time to dry. So this is really cool. Like pears, apples, all that sort of stuff goes through this machine when we're doing our drying, to the point where we actually wore one out. The thread on the shaft started to jump and it wouldn't hold anymore because we'd used it so many times. So we had to buy another one. So yeah, with your apples, if you've got a surplus of apples, absolutely, grab a dryer, grab one of these things, and if you store plain apple, that's great. It still comes out tasting absolutely fine, but we went the extra mile by just drizzling some honey and then letting the cinnamon stick to the honey and get drawn into the fruit as it dries, and they come out awesome.
Delicious.
The big thing you get with doing food this way what you've got to realize is the food you've actually stored is a lot smaller than normal. So you grab a handful of dried apple, like from here, you're probably picking up 3 whole apples at once. So you've got, yeah, I've never learnt the discipline of opening the bags and not eating within the bags. But if you do that for banana, you can eat 5 bananas in the same time you can eat one, because everything's dried. So you're getting more volume in the bags. So the nice way of doing it is going, a banana cut up the way we cut up probably produces about 16 slices. So just take sort of like 12 slices out of the bag and you're eating a whole apple. Otherwise, you grab a handful and you find, eating a whole banana. Otherwise, you grab a handful of banana, you're probably eating 2.5, 3 bananas in one handful. It's the same with everything you dry. You're going to have way more volume in the bags than you actually realize. But yeah, that's the machine we use, right? So we just grab one of those for apples and pears. Absolutely brilliant. Cool. All right.
Thanks, Gary. Great. Excellent.
I'll probably turn the recording off, eh? Yeah, it's been an hour.